It started like any other late-night shift, the kind I had grown used to over the past few months. Working at a high-powered law firm wasn't for the faint of heart, and over time had become a way of life. My boss, Mr. Carter, was the kind of man everyone admired. He was sharp, confident, and carried an air of authority that could make anyone feel both intimidated and drawn to him at the same time. He was the firm's rising star, and being his assistant meant I was always in his orbit, juggling his demands and keeping up with his relentless pace. I never thought of him as anything more than a demanding boss until that night. The office was eerily quiet as I worked through the stack of briefs he had handed me earlier. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago, but Mr. Carter was still in his office, the glow of his desk lamp visible through the glass wall. He had always been professional, almost cold in his demeanor, rarely giving more than the occasional compliment on my work. But that night felt different. There was something in the way he lingered when he handed me a file, his hand brushing against mine for just a second too long. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on my overactive imagination. After all, why would a man like him ever look twice at someone like me? It was nearing midnight when I heard his voice. "Can you come in here for a moment?" he called out, his tone calm but commanding. My heart skipped a beat as I stood, smoothing down my shirt and grabbing my notebook. When I stepped into his office, the air felt charged, heavier than before. He gestured for me to sit, his piercing blue eyes locking onto mine in a way that made me feel both exposed and unable to look away. "You've been doing exceptional work lately," he said, his voice softer than usual. It caught me off guard. Praise from him was rare, and I wasn't sure how to respond. "Thank you," I managed, my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving mine. "I'm going to need someone I can rely on, someone I can trust completely." "I think you might be that person," he said, his tone shifting into something deeper, almost intimate. The room felt smaller, the space between us charged with an unspoken tension. I nodded, unsure where this conversation was headed, but the intensity of his gaze made it impossible to think clearly. When he stood and moved around his desk, leaning against it just a few feet away from me, I realized I was holding my breath. Mr. Carter's gaze remained locked onto mine, and my pulse quickened. The air between us was thick, with an unspoken energy that made it hard to focus on anything else. He was so close now, his presence overwhelming. My mind raced with confusion, unable to fully grasp what was happening. I'd never seen him like this before. This side of him was completely new, and it stirred something deep inside me. "I need to know you can handle more responsibility," he said, his voice low, his words carrying an undeniable weight. I nodded, trying to maintain composure. "Of course," I replied, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. He took a step closer, and suddenly the space between us felt impossibly small. His eyes dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second, before meeting my eyes again, and in that brief moment, I felt a spark of something I hadn't expected. I could sense the tension building, thick and palpable, and yet I couldn't pull away. A part of me wanted to, but another part, the part I couldn't control, was drawn to him. The authority he exuded, the way he always had everything under control, only made him more magnetic. "Good," he said, his voice hushed as he took another step closer. "Because I'm going to need you to stay a little longer tonight." The way he said it with such calm authority made it sound like a command. I hesitated for a moment, knowing how late it already was, but something in his voice made me say, "Okay." I felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with uncertainty, but I didn't want to disappoint him, especially after his unexpected praise. The door to his office was shut, and it suddenly felt like we were the only two people left in the world. He walked back to his desk, but this time he didn't sit behind it. Instead, he leaned against the edge, facing me. "There's something about you," he murmured, his tone shifting again, becoming more intimate, more intense. His eyes roamed over me in a way that made my skin prickle with heat. Something I can't ignore. His words made my heart race, and I felt a wave of desire coursing through me that I didn't know how to control. Before I could respond, he took another step closer, closing the distance between us, and my breath caught in my throat. I could feel the heat radiating off him, and I knew in that moment that things were about to change. The room seemed to close in around us, the air thick with anticipation. I had never imagined myself in this position, standing so close to my boss, feeling this undeniable attraction. But I couldn't deny what was happening. Mr. Carter's presence was overpowering, and I felt as though he was pulling me in, without words, just with his gaze. His proximity made my thoughts scatter, and I struggled to keep my composure. He reached out, his fingers lightly grazing my arm, sending a shiver through my body. The touch was deliberate, yet it was as if he was testing the waters, waiting for my response. "You know," he said, his voice low and smooth, "you've always been so professional. I admire that about you." His hand lingered on my arm, the warmth of his touch radiating through my skin. But tonight, I need more than just professionalism. The way he said it made my stomach tighten with a mix of desire and nervousness. I couldn't seem to find the words to respond, my mind in a fog, overwhelmed by the tension and the pull I felt between us. Before I could gather my thoughts, he closed the remaining distance between us, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered, "I want you." The words sent a jolt through me, and for a moment, everything else faded away. My heart raced, and my breath became shallow as I stood frozen in place. The logical part of my brain screamed at me to pull back, to walk out of the room and pretend none of this was happening. But the other part of me, the part that had always been drawn to him, felt a surge of heat that I couldn't resist. Without thinking, I found myself leaning into him, my body responding to his touch as if it had a mind of its own. His hands moved to the back of my neck, his grip firm yet gentle as he pulled me toward him. And then, his lips were on mine. It wasn't just a kiss. It was raw, hungry, filled with the tension we'd both been avoiding. His lips were soft yet demanding, and the moment they touched mine, a fire ignited within me. Every kiss, every caress, sent sparks of desire coursing through my veins. I was no longer thinking about the consequences or the boundaries I had always kept in place. The only thing that mattered was the feeling of his hands on me, the heat of his body against mine, the intoxicating sensation of being wanted so intensely. I knew this was dangerous, that crossing this line would change everything. But in that moment, nothing else seemed to matter. The moment our lips parted, I stood there, breathless, unsure of what had just happened. The room felt suffocating, and yet the energy between us was undeniable. Mr. Carter's eyes were dark, filled with something primal that mirrored my own desire. He didn't say a word at first, just studied me, as if waiting for me to say something, to stop this madness before it went any further. But I couldn't find the words. The fire in me had been lit, and I was no longer capable of rational thought. Everything felt so right, even though I knew it was wrong. Without saying anything, he gently guided me toward his desk, his hands never leaving my body. The sound of my heartbeat was deafening in my ears, and every step felt like I was walking towards something irreversible. As I was pushed back against the solid wood of his desk, I could feel the heat radiating from his body, every inch of me trembling with anticipation. His lips found mine again, this time more urgent, more desperate. I kissed him back just as fiercely, my hands tangling in his shirt, pulling him closer, kneading him in a way that was foreign yet thrilling. His hands roamed to my waist, pulling me closer, and I could feel the hard outline of his body pressing against mine. I had never felt so desired, so wanted in my entire life. His fingers moved to the buttons of my shirt, undoing them with practiced ease. I felt a rush of heat flood my body, my pulse quickening as each button came undone, revealing more of my skin to him. He didn't hesitate, his hands immediately touching my bare chest, his fingers caressing the sensitive skin there. I moaned softly at the contact, unable to suppress the desire building inside me. "Are you sure about this?" he asked in a whisper, his voice strained as he looked into my eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation. But I couldn't bring myself to answer with words. Instead, I nodded, my body trembling with the weight of what we were about to do. It felt like everything had led up to this moment, this collision of power, desire, and danger. He seemed to take that as all the confirmation he needed. With a decisive move, he lifted me onto the desk, his lips trailing down my neck, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. My body responded instinctively, my hands gripping his shoulders as his lips moved lower, leaving me breathless and craving more. Every touch, every kiss, every breath felt like a spark, igniting a larger flame. And I knew, in that moment, that there was no turning back. We were both in this together, for whatever would come next. The office, the rules, the consequences, none of it mattered. All that existed in that moment was the heat between us. As the night progressed, time seemed to lose all meaning. Every touch, every kiss, every breath between us pushed us further into the depths of desire. Mr. Carter was relentless, his hands exploring every inch of my body, making me forget everything except the overwhelming sensations coursing through me. The office, the desk, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, everything faded into the background. All that mattered was him, his touch, and the desperate need that had ignited between us. As I lay there on his desk, my body responding to every movement he made, I realized how much I had wanted this, how much I had craved the intensity and power that came with being with him. But even as the pleasure built, a part of me knew this wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something dangerous. There were consequences to what we were doing, and yet the heat of the moment consumed me, making it impossible to think of anything else. His lips moved down my body, each kiss setting me ablaze, and I felt myself giving in to him completely, surrendering to the passion that had taken over both of us. As he undressed me fully, his eyes never leaving mine, I could see the hunger in them, the same desire that mirrored my own. He moved with confidence, with purpose, each action controlled and yet filled with urgency. I reached for him, pulling him closer, needing him as much as he needed me. We were locked in this dance, our bodies colliding with a desperate rhythm that felt as if nothing could ever come close to matching the intensity of this moment. Every second felt electric, as though the world outside the four walls of his office didn't exist. Finally, as he entered me, I gasped, the feeling overwhelming in the best possible way. We moved together, every thrust sending waves of pleasure crashing over me, making it hard to focus on anything but the sensations coursing through my body. I was lost in the moment, lost in him, in the dangerous heat that had built between us. It was raw, intense, and filled with a need that neither of us could deny. Each movement was a step further into a place we couldn't return from. Eventually, as we both reached the peak of our desire, everything seemed to explode in a moment of pure release. We lay there, breathless and tangled in each other, the reality of what we had just done sinking in. The office was quiet once more, but the weight of the experience lingered between us, heavy and undeniable. I didn't know what would come of this, whether it was a one-time thing or something more. But in that moment, I knew things would never be the same. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories.